Welcome,
Thank you.
Cheryl. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Victoria Williams, Chair of the State Public Affairs Committee of the Junior Leagues of New Jersey. We're so glad to have you. Thank you for joining us. This is our committee. Some of our committee members had to leave. So many juggling and
Um,
competing responsibilities and commitments.
Year.
So you know how that goes. So thank you so much for being here. So at this point, I will turn it over to Cheryl Bear, our vice chair, to formally introduce you, and then we will allow you to share your presentation with us.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
So thank you so much. We're honored to have you. So Sheryl Mintz has been a member of the New Jersey Speakers Bureau for more than 2 decades and has spoken with elementary school teachers and civic groups. She is a graduate of SUNY Albany, was a general course student at the London School of Economics, and earned her law degree from Rutgers Law School in Newark. Since 1985, she has been a practicing attorney in New York and New Jersey, and in 2015, she sat for and passed the Florida bar. She is fully admitted in all of these jurisdictions. Her practice has shifted from litigation, concentrating on commercial, construction, and insurance matters, to functioning almost entirely as a neutral, serving as an arbitrator and mediator. Since 2006, she has held adjunct teaching positions at Rutgers Law School in Newark, New Jersey, and later at St. John's University School of Law in Queens, New York. Her courses focus on alternative dispute resolution, specifically methods of resolving private disputes outside the court system. She continues to arbitrate and mediate full time, and since March 2020 has conducted most proceedings remotely. This year, she was honored as the Staten Island Richmond County Mediator of the Year. She spends time at the Jersey Shore in Seagirt, New Jersey, and in Boca Raton, Florida. Thank you so much for being willing to do this training with us.
Oh, of course. No, it's my pleasure. I'd like to learn a little bit more about your organization. So if you can,
Mm.
I went online. It looks like it's a
Okay.
lobbying group and
Well, well,
So
yeah. So
nonpartisan advocacy.
yeah, so we are the Junior League, and so the Junior League we're a part of the Association of Junior Leagues International, so we're an international organization, and so our focus and our mission is to collaborate with community partners and advance the Public Affairs Committee to advance legislation to support women and children, and so our organization at large is focused on building community and volunteer leadership for women and advancing women's leadership. And so we do that through our advocacy. We are not a lobbying organization, although we do lobby in the sense that we advocate, but we do not, there's no money that exchanges hands with us. And so this Public Affairs Committee is the legislative arm of the Junior League. And there are 8 Junior Leagues in New Jersey, and we're all here representing uh, most of the Junior Leagues that of the 8. So there's Bergen County, there's Monmouth County, there's Morristown, Summit, which is my league. We have junior leagues of the Oranges and Short Hills. We also have Princeton and we have Elizabeth Plainfield. So I think I may have covered all 8. And so we're spanning from the north to the south across the state, focusing on advocacy, supporting women and children.
women.
And so part of why we would love to have you here, as we are the legislative arm of the league, just to learn a little bit more about civics, how government works, and what can better equip us as we are working with legislators and try to influence public policy.
Okay, very good. So I will try to focus on women and children, and the history and the U.S. Constitution will be very instructive in that regard. So let me open up and we will share the screen. I've been working on it for a bit. And I hope you can all see the PowerPoint. Yes, okay, great. So I will recommend to you, and it's not in the PowerPoint. I'm happy to share the PowerPoint. To be perfectly honest, I just went online and I first chat GPT'd it, but then I obviously refined it quite a bit. There is a book out, and it's fairly recent by a wonderful author, and maybe I'll put it in the chat. Her name is Jill Lepore, and Jill is a historian, a professor at Harvard, and she's written many books about U.S. history, government, and her recent one is called For the People, and it is a book about the U.S. Constitution. And I'm in the middle of it now. It's a bit lengthy, but it's really wonderful. And there was another book she wrote, I think it was called, if I remember, These Truths, also by Jill Lepore. So if you want to get it at the library, and that was a history book, and it was, again, very lengthy. But what was very interesting was New Jersey was one of the first states that gave women the right to vote. They rescinded it, but very early on, they did give women that right. And we're going to go through an overview of the Constitution and then the Bill of Rights and some of the amendments to the Constitution. The Bill of Rights is just the first 10 amendments, but there are obviously others that are of interest to us. So let's just take a look. But her book is so wonderful, and it really gives a wonderful history of what was going on. You also may be interested in PBS, has a series now commemorating 250 years of, since independence and all that, the Revolutionary War. And then, just like now, there were, of course, many differences of opinion as to whether they should revolt against the mother country of England. And of course, the role of slaves is really interesting, phenomenal, because many of the slaves thought they would align themselves with the British against, of course, their slave masters. It's a fascinating series. I recommend that to you as well. But getting back here, we'll look at the historical context, and we'll look at what led to the Constitution, what came before it, the Bill of Rights, and then some of the very important amendments, especially in the areas that are important to women. Okay, so let's look at the historical context and the origins of our Constitution. Let me just make this bigger. Okay. Hold on 1 second, please. Okay. The Articles of Confederation came before the Constitution, before the constitutional amendment. You have to try to put yourselves back in time, what was going on at that time. At that time, you had the 13 states, and they didn't really have that much in common other than they had fought a war together against Great Britain. But there were definitely differences of opinion as to whether the power, the governmental power, should be in the states versus some more federal or over, how should I say it, a federal government. So one that would be overlooking each of the states, or should they just be a very loosely united, let's say, or loosely related group of governments? Think of the European Union, the countries that are in Europe. They're each very individual and they're sovereign. And then in more recent years, you have the EU and you have the Euro and things of that nature. But they're all individual sovereign states. And when the Articles of Confederation came about, that was more the intent that they didn't, the individual colonies, now states, didn't have the same, didn't necessarily have the same interest in having national, across the entire country, procedures and institutions, seen things like currencies and postal service and stuff. So it was a weak central government. It had limited powers. The states were loosely connected. And there wasn't the authority to govern, and there was fighting among the states. Of course, slavery was a very big scourge and a very big subject of dissent among the states. So there was a concern that this group of states, these 13 colonies, would not survive, although they had survived, of course, war against Great Britain. And there was concern that if they all seemed to go different ways, that there wouldn't ultimately be a country that would survive. So the Articles of Confederation were deemed inadequate, and they met at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787, and the goal was to try to create a document that would accommodate the interests both of the states for self-government of their more local areas and local people versus having an overriding national system as well. Now, I don't need to impress upon you that in these pictures and in, frankly, all the discussion, I'm glad to see it's all women and diverse women on this call, everyone here is a white man. And one of the parts in Jill Lepore's book that I'm at now, that I'm in the middle of reading, the book on the Constitution for the people, it talks about amendments, which we'll get to when we talk about the Bill of Rights. And one of the amendments that had been suggested was that, well, the president has to be a white male of property. And that, of course, did not become one of the amendments. And you might think that was very liberal, but it wasn't liberal. The reason it wasn't an amendment was it was so obvious at that time the president would have to be a white male. And of course, in these pictures, that's what you see. They're all white men. So the purpose of the Constitutional Convention was to develop a document. This was quite unique and quite, how shall I say, novel at the time. You have to realize these are people that were ruled by a monarch. So we'll give it to them, sure, they weren't thinking of women and they weren't thinking of women, whether they were of color or white or whatever. They were only thinking of men, clearly. But then again, what was going on? These were people that were subjugated by a king. And if you live under a monarchy or if you live under an autocratic regime even today, it's not government by the people, it's government by the monarch, by the tyrant, by the king. But here, they were trying to develop a government that would be by the people, as they say, for the people, but we know for some of the people and not for others, just like not for us on this call. Anyway, enough about that. Okay, so the Philadelphia Convention, the Constitutional Convention, as it says in the PowerPoint, was to discuss the limitation of the Articles of Confederation because it just wasn't working for a national government. And there was intense debate, and there were provisions that were adopted by states in the South and not by the North and vice versa. And it took quite a while to develop compromises. And of course, slavery was a very tough issue at that time, with the states in the South very adamantly saying they had to protect that way of life, and which was found to be reprehensible to some of the states in the North. New Jersey was more, let's say, open-minded, progressive on that. Massachusetts, even more so. People really wrote against slavery at that time, but it was something that existed, and it existed, of course, even after the convention was finally ratified. Now, I have here little sections on some of the ideas that were being discussed at the time, just to give you a sense of how unique the Constitution was and how it did embody some of the philosophical thought that was being discussed at the time. So we discussed the Enlightenment, the idea, again, liberty, justice, governmental powers. Rousseau was a famous French philosopher. And even then, and you'll see these ideas are things that were so way back, and of course we're grappling with them today. The idea of private property as a source of inequality, of course, and of course we see it today. And the American and the French revolutions were in part because of that great inequality, which of course we have today, even more so. So what I would like to stress here, and I've discussed a few moments ago, was that this idea of people being responsible for their government was a sea change from undying loyalty and obedience to a monarch, to a king, to a deity, to somebody that had some kind of divine rule. And so there was an idea that people, for the people, had to develop a government and self-govern. The idea of natural rights, that's another idea that came from the 1700s, 1800s. And John Locke was an English philosopher who felt that men, we didn't really discuss women then, were by nature free and equal, and they were they had certain inalienable rights, which you see in the Constitution. And there it was life, liberty, and property. We have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The idea men are naturally free and equal to justify legitimate political government. And that's what they called the social contract. The social contract is people will enter into a contract with their government and thereby give up certain rights. We don't live in the jungle. We live according to law. There is a rule of law, and that's what they mean by the social contract. That's the way you ensure stable society. You ensure a way of people dealing together, living together. Certain rights are given to the government, the right to enforce the law. And that was the idea behind the social contract, the natural rights. As I say in the PowerPoint, Rousseau and Voltaire, these were French philosophers, and they were really trying to argue away from a religious society of undying loyalty to a god or a king, and to say there should be participation by citizens, that if you enter into this social contract that there will be a rule of law and government, people need to participate and be active in it. So these are the different theories. And if you can imagine, if you go back in time, people that were subject to a king or a queen that was considered divine, for them then to take responsibility for their actions and for their laws and their society, that was a big change in thinking. And I always think how interesting it must have been to live at that time, even if you were a woman, because I think Abigail Adams and, well, she more than others, more than Martha Washington, really did have a say in what was going on. Okay, so what we're going to talk about here as far as the Constitution. We'll talk about the structure of the Constitution, the clear framework, the separation of powers, which we're hearing a lot about these days, especially at the federal level, and how the federal government works together with the state government. And these are issues that are coming up every day. We see them in the news, especially with this federal administration. Okay, so here, the framework, there is the preamble to the Constitution, the articles that separate the branches of government with the checks and balances, and then there are the constitutional amendments, the first 10 amendments being the Bill of Rights. Okay, there are, and I'm sure you're aware of this, there are 3 government branches. There is the legislative branch, if looking out on the federal level, is the Congress. The executive branch, of course, is the president, and the judicial branches. And the idea behind the Constitution was that there would be these checks and balances, that each branch would have very discrete and distinct powers and responsibilities, and that accordingly, there would be checks on each of the other branches so that none of them would accumulate too much power to the detriment of any of the other branches. For example, very early on, a very famous case was Marbury versus Madison, where the Supreme Court of the United States said, we will decide what is meant in the Constitution. It is our role to interpret the Constitution. So that particular case had to do with the appointment of somebody by one executive presidential government in the hours when the government was going to be transitioned. And so the Supreme Court said, we will decide whether or not the president in that case had exceeded his powers. So that remains a check on the executive powers. Congress has the purse strings. So that is a check on executive powers. And if you read anything these days, it seems more than ever, these issues are coming up. When President Trump has executive orders, can he do it? Can he do it? The recent debate, if you heard the oral argument before the Supreme Court on the tariffs were always traditionally a function of Congress as a way of raising revenue. Can a president, by executive order, impose tariffs unless there's some emergency surrounding the imposition? So those are issues that come up. More recently, the appointments, the Federal Reserve or the FTC appointments that Trump has fired people. Does he have the right to do that? Well, under established case law, he did not. So the question will be, and we will see, will the U.S. Supreme Court change that? But it's a very living document, and these are very, of course, relevant issues for us today. Here we talk about federalism, the division of authority, the division of power, and what they mean by simultaneous governance is that there obviously are actions that are taken by the federal government. Think about an army, right? Going off to a foreign war. You wouldn't expect New Jersey to send militia on its own. That would be something that you would expect the federal government to do. Or the aid, foreign aid. That is something that you would expect a federal government to do. Yet there are clearly areas where the states have their own rights, and certain rights under the U.S. Constitution are reserved for the states. And there are areas where you do not expect the federal government to meddle, usually education, usually family rights. Those are subjects that are more in line with government by the states or regulation by the states as opposed to the federal government. So we see these issues again with threats to withhold federal funding unless a state takes a certain tack or refrains from a certain tack, the DEI issues, all of that. Can a federal government do that? Because these are subject matters that generally are relegated to the states that are governing and regulating their own local governments. Okay, the first, I'm sorry, let me get rid of this. 1 second. Okay. The first 10 amendments are the Bill of Rights, because the Constitution, up until the amendments, really dealt with how is the government going to function. But the Bill of Rights, what it does is it saves certain rights of the people vis-a-vis the government. There are certain things, and we're talking the federal government, and every state also has a constitution. Of course, New Jersey does too, very much in line with the federal constitution. The concept behind the Bill of Rights was that there are certain rights that the government, here the federal government, says we will not take these away from you, citizens. It's a contract between the federal government and the citizens saying you have certain freedoms, certain inalienable rights, and we will not take them away from you. And the Constitution would not have been ratified if the Bill of Rights had not been included. So let's just take a look at them. This is exactly right. There were fears that the Constitution as formed did not protect individual rights. And there was concern that it would not get ratified for that reason, because the individuals felt that they could be persecuted. Remember, they just came off a war with a monarch that they felt did not respect their individual rights. So without the Bill of Rights, there was real concern the Constitution would not be ratified. There was also concern because under the Articles of Confederation, it was very loose and there wasn't a uniform type of government. So in order to strengthen this government and act e pluribus unum means from many comes one, in order to do that, they developed the Constitution, but the Constitution itself, in order to strengthen this federal system, it was felt that it took away the individual rights and they were not being protected. And that's why the Bill of Rights was adopted. These first 10 amendments, right off the bat, the Constitution was amended through the Bill of Rights. So let's take a look at what they are. The First Amendment, and I say it over and over again, I'm sorry to repeat myself, but these are issues we are seeing today. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibit the free exercise thereof, or abridge freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. I need not tell you what we see in the news now, that these issues, that this particular amendment is being tested all the time. People have the right to speak. Now, of course, even freedom of speech has to have some limits. You can't, the classic example, you can't cry fire in a crowded theater unless there is a fire, but you can't say whatever you want to say if you're endangering people, if you're endangering others and yourself. Obviously, there is some limitation on the freedom of speech, but to be able to express your views and to air them, it's a fundamental right. There is not to be any official religion. Remember, in England, you had Church of England, you had Henry VIII establishing his own religion for various reasons, which we don't have to get into here. But there is no established religion. And for some people, the idea that some feel there should be is very anathema and is very concerning. Let's look at amendment number 2. A well-regulated militia being necessary shall not be infringed. Sure, you can have a militia, but let's look at amendment number 3. No soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner prescribed by law, meaning you can't force soldiers into your house. You can't knock on the door and go into somebody's private home. There are respect for private rights. That's what all this is, respect for private rights. You can't force people to give up their home. You can't force people to come out of their home. It seems self-evident, but look at what we've seen recently, National Guard coming into our cities. So it's very relevant for today. Here's another very similar Fourth Amendment to part of the Bill of Rights. The right of people to be secure in persons, houses, paper against unreasonable search and seizure. That's what you call Fourth Amendment rights. You've seen, well, in criminal procedure, you learn in law school, you can't be stopped unless there's probable cause. You can't have somebody come into your house unless there's probable cause. There's a warrant. There's a judicial officer removed from the crime that is being investigated to take a look at the evidence, the sworn testimony, the affidavit of the informant to see, is there really probable cause? Do I really want to let people, law enforcement, to come into this house? Because we have a right in our house to be secure and to be safe. So these are the search and the Fourth Amendment is search and seizure. And the idea is if something is improperly obtained, any sort of drug paraphernalia, any sort of contraband, if it is obtained by law enforcement, contrary to the Fourth Amendment, without the adequate rights and the adequate safeguards, such as a warrant before somebody can come in, then you would have a basis for what we call a motion to suppress. That evidence would not be able to be admitted in any criminal proceeding. It's a strong right. These are all very strong rights. And you hear people talking about them all the time. You hear, oh, no establishment of religion, oh, free speech, free speech. But it really is something to see it in black and white and to realize, yes, these are rights that we have. So it almost seems, why is there a discussion? But we have to make sure that the government, be it state or federal, always protects these rights. Now let's look at the Fifth Amendment. No person shall be held to answer for capital, otherwise crime, unless presentment of an indictment on a grand jury. Because what happens now, we've heard recently, Comey and Letitia James were supposedly indicted, but the procedure was improper. I think in their cases, the prosecutors were improperly appointed and their indictments were all dismissed. And so there has to be some breaks on power of executives that's run amok, which some would say, I would say, has happened recently in our country. So that's why it is so important to have this Bill of Rights. You cannot be put in the dock, so to speak, or asked to defend yourself against a capital claim unless there is an indictment by a grand jury, a proper indictment by a grand jury. Also, you see here, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense twice. That means you can't be tried twice if you're acquitted. That's it. That's what we call no double jeopardy. And then you've heard Fifth Amendment. People say, I take the Fifth, I take the Fifth. Means nobody can be compelled to testify against himself or herself in any criminal proceeding. That's the taking the Fifth, which we all see on television and we've all heard of. And very importantly, one cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property. You cannot have your fundamental rights infringed without due process of law. Due process of law. And some of those safeguards are within this Fifth Amendment. You must have proper presentment. There must be an indictment. You can't just have your property, your life taken from you. There has to be a proper proceeding, proper safeguards before appropriate adjudicators. Okay, so that's fundamental to a democratic society. Now here when they say nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation, that's what we call in the law eminent domain. They want to, but that's if they want to build a road and it's going right in through your house. Well, in those cases, and of course there has to be a proper proceeding, has to be due process, and you must be given adequate compensation if the public in its infinite wisdom decides that it must take your public property. Okay, so, and then the Sixth Amendment, here we talk about a right to a speedy trial. This is for criminal proceedings, and this is the right to counsel. So it's a very important right that if you are being charged with any criminal crime of a certain, not a speeding ticket, let's say, but if there's a risk that you might lose a license or you might be incarcerated, something of that seriousness, then there is a right to counsel. And if you are unable to afford counsel, and there are ways of determining that, then as you know, and again, you see on the television, you have a right to have counsel appointed for you. We've heard them as the Miranda rights because there was a famous case of Miranda in the 1960s where it was determined that criminal defendants or people charged with criminal offenses of a certain magnitude where there was a risk of that type of infraction, of loss of life, incarceration, etc., they have the right to silence, which is the Fifth Amendment, a right not to testify. Anything they say can be used against them, but they have to be told that, and they have the right to counsel. And I know we've heard this on every television show, but it's worth repeating and it's worth seeing in black and white. These are not just things on cop shows. These are things that are fundamental to living in a democratic society. Okay, and the seventh law, there's Seventh Amendment, sorry, is the right to jury trial. Of course, it was there $20, but there is a right to trial by jury, and it is enshrined in the Constitution. And it's not just for criminal, it's for civil cases too. You have the right to a jury. And in the court procedural rules, if you don't ask for a jury, that right may be deemed to be waived, but nonetheless, it is in the Constitution. So it is canonized, let's say, it's codified, I should say, within the Constitution. And then we see that there should not be excessive bail, so that for certain offenses, people should be able to remain at large, remain to be free, in fact, remain free to prepare their defense, if there will be a defense, if they're being charged with a criminal crime. And the Ninth Amendment, of what's interesting, see, well, they're just talking about the enumeration of certain rights, everything else that's not here. What the Ninth Amendment, the point of it is that anything that's not identified remains the power of the people. Now, what happened to the 10th? I don't have the 10th. Let me just look it up, I think. My bad. Anyway, I think when I copied it kind of got lost away. But let's go into some of the other amendments. Some of them were not quite as interesting. after the Bill of Rights, some of them were just about electors and salaries of the legislature and things of that nature. But the highlights are
And
the
Cheryl, I just wanted to just mention that we are almost running up against time.
whole.
Um, yeah, just because we normally end by 8, and I will don't want to keep the
No, no,
members
let
on
me,
past that.
I'm going to get us through this
Just so that we
really.
have enough time for questions and answers. I mean, I certainly this is great information, I think, for all of us, but I'm certainly a history buff myself, and I have a couple questions I have, but I certainly want to obviously uh give everyone else an opportunity to ask any questions. But certainly if you wanted to just summarize
Yeah,
anything.
maybe I will just summarize some of the other amendments and then we'll be done. But let me just go, the 13th was the one that abolished slavery. We still don't have women voting, by the way. And then the 14th was the naturalization persons born in the US are citizens, which we thought really wasn't an issue, but seems to have come up as an issue. And here you have the 15th Amendment, the right to vote shall not be denied on account of race, color, etc. Still not for women. Just remember that. And here, this is sort of this was prohibition. So you have the 18th Amendment and then the 21st Amendment repealed it, which is just sort of interesting, but it doesn't do much for us. And then here, finally, ladies, in 1920, the women get the right to vote. So it took kind of forever. And then this is 22, which talks about you can't run for president more than twice, which again has come up recently. And this is where they gave the vote to people 18 and over. So this is a summary of some of the Bill of Rights, speech, religion, which we've talked about, right to assemble, due process, fair trials, all things that are fundamental to our society. And this is what led to the civil rights movement in the 1960s, the women's movement in the 70s. Unfortunately, we never got the Equal Rights Amendment, and that's where we are today. You know, there are ongoing cases that we read about all the time, arguments that are before the US Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is constantly they haven't come up with too many decisions recently. A lot of it is interim decisions, what they call the shadow docket. But the US Supreme Court has interpreted certain immunities and has really expanded the power of the executive. But that's not for one president, that's for everyone. So I think they may have to rein it in a bit. And it's a constantly relevant issue. It's a constant debate, federal government versus state government, whose jurisdiction is it, whose authority is it? And it's here and it's still here, and hopefully the Constitution will remain here. So I'm happy to take any questions that you might have, and I'll just stop sharing. There we go.
That's great. Thank you. I certainly have some questions, a couple of things just to highlight about the Junior League. So the Junior League was founded in 1901
Wow.
in New York City. And so by a young 19-year-old socialite who wanted to advance and focus on children's issues and community issues. And so, and here we are today,
Mhm.
you know, post that. Um, and the Junior League actually played a pivotal role in the women's suffrage movement in support of the 19th Amendment, as well as other organizations. Shout out to my sorority, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, that actually was a part of the women's suffrage movement in the 1913 to advance the right to vote. And then so then there were white women were given the right to vote. Women were given the right to vote, but not black women. White women were. And so then it wasn't until the 19 during the civil rights uh, movement, and you highlighted that
Mhm.
the Civil Rights Act to give black women the right to vote. Just wanted to highlight that. And then also New Jersey, you highlighted New Jersey early on in your presentation, that New Jersey, and I believe you said Massachusetts being, a bit on the liberal side in terms of in support of various actions for equal opportunity. Actually, New Jersey was the last state in the union to recognize the abolishment of slavery. So it was the last state in the union. In fact, went in, I believe it was the 13th Amendment, as you pointed out, abolished slavery. um, New Jersey initially rejected it. And so, and it was the last thing. And I just honestly, and the only reason I just went to, I just attended an event, and I grew up in Tennessee. I just attended an event over the weekend, and where I learned about New Jersey being the last state because you hear about Texas and enslaved people not finding out about the ending of slavery, or the Emancipation Proclamation being um, read to them, or to know about the Emancipation Proclamation, and that Texas was the last state, or that they were the people there were the last ones to know that slavery was being abolished, or reading the Emancipation Proclamation. Um, and that's where we get Juneteenth, the recognition of Juneteenth. But it wasn't. I just found out, and I don't know, maybe other people knew that about New Jersey being the last state to and it had to be enforced post um, 13th Amendment. So I just wanted to just mention that because I just learned that, and so I don't know if you wanted to mention that,
I
and
didn't
anybody else.
know that.
Yeah, I just didn't. Yeah.
There was a big abolitionist movement in the Philadelphia area. There was, God, I read this wonderful book, I can't think, where there were women who were from the families that had slaves in the South, maybe Virginia. They moved to Philadelphia and they became very powerful abolitionists, and
Mhm.
it's really very interesting. It's
Yeah, so just some interesting history there about New Jersey. So just wanted to just um mention that. Anybody else have some questions for sure? This is great. I certainly learned and learning, and I'm relearning a lot of things I'm sure I
You really
learned.
have to see it because you hear about the rights and you hear about due process, but this is the law. This is our Constitution. Constitution's it's hard to change. It's hard to modify. As you can see, there aren't that many amendments. Some states have a lot of amendments, like California's, I don't
Yeah.
know how many they
Well,
have.
that's what's so great about organizations like the Junior League, because the Junior League was there in the forefront, marching, during the women's suffrage movement, to advance that the ability for women to have the right to vote. So the Junior League has always taken a leadership role for community issues, which is why we're all a part of the Junior League. And then the public affairs group, which we are, state public affairs, we're nonpartisan legislative arm, but we're continuing that. We're continuing sort of that charge of advancing legislation, focusing on women's issues, supporting families. And what you highlighted, which is so relevant and important, talking about what the framers meant, what they planned for, what they wanted in the Constitution, as you outlined the Bill of Rights. um, just so relevant and important today. And, it's almost taking us through that history lesson all over again, with the Constitution being tested, with all of the various, and again, not to be, and this really isn't a political conversation, and it's just really just reality of history and learning what the Constitution, or recognizing what the Constitution's there for, why it was established, because they didn't want a king or monarchy. They wanted a free and fair government, operational government. And so, that's why the Constitution was established in the first place, fighting against the monarchy. And so that's certainly, you're right, being tested today. But as women, as in, with women's organization, always wanting to, and just fighting, for the right to vote and
And to
bother to
participate. We're
participating in the
we're half
process.
of society. We have to participate, and we have to have the right to participate, and the law is what gives us the right. But
Anybody else? I don't want to hog it all.
no, it's, I feel very strongly, I feel very strongly in supporting young women and seeing them succeed. I think we all have to help each other. It's hard, but you're all doing it. And I applaud you for doing it.
Well, you are. So thank you for helping to give us this educational civic training because we're looking like, Victoria said, we're nonpartisan. So part of what we do is try to bridge the gap with legislators, regardless of, whether or not they currently support the issues we want them to. And so you helped give us the foundation that we can always argue constitutional law. So that's why this is so
Oh, no, you
important.
shouldn't. I mean, but you know what? Your biggest power is in voting.
Uh,
I think as constituents, that's where you're going to have a tremendous amount of power. You vote, and the dollars, where you put your money, and you have to take care of your families, and so government's for the people.
yeah.
And that's what the Constitution is really all about. It's for the people. Now it's for all the people. It wasn't necessarily so back then. It was probably only for a small percentage of the population, not women, not people who were enslaved. So
And
anyway,
and through these, as part of this training series that Cheryl has set up for us, it's giving us this background, giving us this additional confidence to be able to work with legislators so that we well understand the law. Of course, we well understand the law, and we're advocating for these issues that are supporting families and, women, children, families. And it's giving us that background and giving us that support, giving us that additional information that we need as we begin to do our research on the bills. We reach out to our legislators. We are putting together policy briefs. We are, putting together, understanding what that's even like and the importance and how to package all of that. And then when we're speaking to legislators, giving them our elevator pitch, but then also sort of tying that in with understanding, understanding the law and understanding, what's relevant and being able to speak from the heart and with our passion to in supporting all of these various issues.
well, I'd love to stay involved with you ladies.
Yes, please.
So please, if there's any legal question, I am a practicing lawyer. I'm mostly doing neutral work, arbitration, mediation, but I teach, and I'd be more than happy to work with you with any of your initiatives for women and children.
Wonderful.
Please
Thank
keep
you.
me in mind.
You
Absolutely.
will.
Well, thank you so much, Cheryl, and we really appreciate it and appreciate your time, the expertise, and then we will have this recording, and we'll make sure that once we do, we'll point you to our YouTube channel, so you'll be able
Yes,
to
I
sit
would
there.
love to. I really would like to stay involved with helping you out.
Mm.
That's
Don't be
great.
shy.
We would love to have you.
Okay, thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Good
Have a good
night.
night.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Okay, I will stop recording.